My father sent the message at 6:42 a.m., and it wasn't meant for me. I know that because it started with, "We'll tell her after Christmas. Don't ruin this." I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, the coffee maker hissing like it always did. My phone lighting up on the counter where I'd left it face down overnight. For half a second, I assumed it was spam, or one of those group texts my family used to argue about potluck dishes. I picked it up without thinking. The sender name was Dad. The message preview cut off after one line. I opened it. "We'll tell her after Christmas. Don't ruin this for your brother. The will is finalized. She doesn't need to know yet." There was a pause in my body before there was a feeling. A strange stillness, like the moment after you trip, but before you hit the ground. My brain reread the words slowly, as if they might rearrange themselves into something less sharp if I gave them time. "We'll tell her after Christmas. The will is finalized. She doesn't need to know. Yet." I'm she. My name is Claire Donovan. I was 33 years old that morning, living in Columbus, Ohio, in a townhouse I'd bought myself 3 years earlier. I worked as a compliance manager for a regional healthcare network, the kind of job no one in my family ever remembered the title of, but constantly benefited from when they needed paperwork explained or legal language translated. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't fragile. I didn't cry easily. I'd built my adult life on being steady, dependable, the one who showed up early and left last, the one who paid her own bills and never asked for help. And yet, my father had just casually informed someone else that my inheritance had been decided without me, and that my ignorance was part of the plan. A second message came in before I could even lock the screen. "My brother, Mark. Did Dad mean to text you? Call me." I didn't call. I sat down at the kitchen table instead, the coffee forgotten, my palms flat against the wood. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator humming and a delivery truck passing outside. It was the kind of ordinary morning where nothing was supposed to happen. That's how these things always start. Quiet, administrative, a betrayal dressed up as logistics. I scrolled back. The message thread wasn't new. There were earlier texts, ones I had never seen because they weren't addressed to me. Dad and Mark, back and forth, dates, times, decisions. "She's doing fine financially. Mark needs the house more. She won't understand. Claire always takes things personally. We'll say it was Mom's wish." My mother had been dead for 14 months. She hadn't left a will when she passed. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Brutal. She'd always said she and Dad would get around to it. After the funeral, Dad told us not to worry. "Everything will be fair," he said, standing in the driveway while neighbors brought casseroles we didn't eat. Apparently, fair had been redefined. I locked the phone and stared at the wall. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because something fundamental had shifted. A piece of context slid into place, and suddenly, a year's worth of small, confusing moments made sense. The rushed conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. The way Dad had insisted Mark move back home temporarily. The sudden appraisal of the house. The lawyer's name that kept coming up, always followed by, "It's nothing you need to worry about." I had worried anyway. Quietly, privately, like I always did. There was a knock at my door. 3 short taps. Then my sister-in-law's voice, thin through the wood. "Claire, you home?" I didn't answer right away. Emily lived 2 blocks away with Mark. She was 7 months pregnant and liked to drop by unannounced with baked goods and updates about doctor's appointments. Normally, I welcomed it. That morning, her presence felt staged. I opened the door. She smiled too quickly. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, like she was checking for someone else. "Hey," she said. "I was just on my way to work and thought I'd bring you banana bread. Mark said you sounded off last night." "I didn't talk to Mark last night," I said. The smile wavered. "Oh, well, he worries." I stepped aside to let her in, more out of curiosity than politeness. She set the bread on the counter, smoothing the foil like it mattered. I watched her hands. She was nervous. "Emily," I said evenly, "how long have you known about the will?" Her hands froze. She didn't look at me. "I don't know what you mean." I picked up my phone and placed it on the counter between us, screen facing up. I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. She swallowed. Hard. "I thought they told you," she said finally. Mark said you were okay with it. That was the moment. Not the anger, not the sadness, the clarity. There it was. The quiet assumption that I would be okay with whatever they decided. That my role in this family was to adapt, not to consent. That my silence over the years had been mistaken for agreement. What exactly am I okay with? I asked. Emily's shoulders dropped, like she'd been waiting for permission to stop pretending. The house, she said. Your dad's putting it in Mark's name, the savings too, mostly. He said you don't need it, that you've always been independent. He said this was about family continuity. Family continuity. That was new language. Polished, rehearsed. And Mom? I asked. What did she want? Emily hesitated. Too long. I don't think she wrote anything down, she said carefully. But she always said Mark would take care of things. I nodded slowly. Of course she did. In their version of the story. Emily reached for my arm. I stepped back. I need you to leave, I said. Her eyes widened. Claire, don't do this. It's Christmas. This will just make things messy. I looked at her then. Really looked. Messy for who? After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to feel something solid. My phone buzzed again. Dad, this time. Call me. There's been a misunderstanding. There hadn't. What there had been was a miscalculation. They thought exclusion would be easier than confrontation. They thought silence was safer than honesty. They thought I wouldn't look too closely. They forgot what I did for a living. I walked back to the table and opened my laptop. Not to cry, not to vent, but to start a file. Title: Estate Review. Donovan Family. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know how many relationships would fracture, or how much ground I would lose before I gained anything back. What I did know, sitting there in the early morning light, was this. They had already made their move. And I was done being the last person informed about decisions that erased me. By noon, my phone had rung 12 times. I didn't answer any of them. There's a specific kind of silence that follows when you stop performing the role your family assigned you. It's not peaceful. It's charged. Like the air before a storm that everyone else insists isn't coming. I spent the morning doing what I always did when something felt out of control. I organized facts. I printed public records, pulled county filings, reviewed probate law for Franklin County, Ohio, even though I already knew most of it. Intestacy rules, spousal share, children's share, the difference between what was legal and what was simply assumed. The truth was simple and inconvenient. Without a will, my father could not legally disinherit me without my consent or a formal transfer process that required disclosure. Everything else was noise. But families don't operate on law. They operate on pressure. At 1:07 p.m., there was a knock again. This time, I didn't bother pretending I hadn't heard it. Dad stood on my porch with his coat still on, scarf wrapped too tightly around his neck. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just diminished. Like a man who had spent too long being the unquestioned authority and wasn't sure what to do when that authority was paused. "Claire," he said, relief flooding his face as soon as he saw me. "Thank God, you scared us." Us. Always plural. I stepped aside without inviting him in. He took that as permission and walked straight to the living room, sitting in my chair like muscle memory guided him. "You should have called," he said. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "What?" I asked calmly. "Me finding out?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're twisting this. No one is excluding you." He said it the way people say things they need to be true. "I read the messages," I replied, "including the ones where you said I didn't need to know." That was taken out of context. "Then give me the context." He leaned back, crossing his arms. Defensive posture. Familiar. Mark has a family now, a baby on the way. The house makes sense for him. You're doing well. You always have been. There it was. The compliment that functioned like a boundary. You're strong, so you don't need. I didn't say I needed the house, I said. I said you decided without me. He waved a hand. You would have said no just to make a point. I watched him closely then. The lines around his mouth, the impatience under the concern. "You didn't ask," I said, "because you didn't want an answer." His jaw tightened. "Claire," he said slowly, "this family has been through enough. Your mother's death nearly broke us. I'm trying to keep things stable. Stable for who? I stood and walked to the window, giving myself space to think. When I turned back, I spoke carefully. Did Mom ever say she wanted Mark to have everything? Dad hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. She trusted me, he said. That should be enough. It wasn't an answer. It was a power play. I nodded once. Then here's what's going to happen. His eyebrows lifted, surprised by my tone. I'm not agreeing to anything today. I'm not signing anything. And I'm not having this conversation again without a lawyer present. His face hardened. You don't need to get attorneys involved. I already have, I said. That was a lie. But it was a useful one. He stood abruptly. This is exactly what I mean. You always escalate. I looked at him. Really looked. This man who had raised me to be prepared, cautious, informed, who now resented me for being exactly that. You escalated when you planned to tell me after Christmas, I said. I'm just responding. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You're going to regret this. I almost laughed. I already regret trusting you, I replied. He left without another word. That night, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since Mom's funeral. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The house looked the same from the outside. Christmas lights already up, though it was only early December. Mark's car in the driveway. Emily's too. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car across the street and watched through the window. They were at the dining table, papers spread out, Dad leaning forward, Mark nodding, Emily holding her stomach, smiling softly. A family meeting. Without me. I realized then that this wasn't new. It was just visible now. I was the reliable one, the backup, the person you didn't have to include, because I'd always adapt afterward. The realization didn't hurt the way betrayal usually does. It felt colder, like discovering you'd been living in a house with one fewer wall than you thought. I drove home and finally made the call. Her name was Linda Kaplan, estate attorney, late 50s, reputation for being thorough and unimpressed by family drama. She answered on the second ring. I think my family is trying to quietly cut me out of an inheritance, I said. And I need to know my options. There was a pause. Then, that depends. Do you want peace, or do you want control? I thought of the messages, the planned silence, the assumption of my compliance. I want transparency, I said, whatever that costs. Good, Linda replied. Then the first thing we do is stop them from pretending this is already decided. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room and felt something shift again. Not anger. Not vengeance, resolve. They thought the worst thing they'd done was hurt my feelings. And I don't forgive people who do that. The silence didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a tide you don't notice until your shoes are already wet. After my father left that afternoon, the calls stopped. No more texts from Mark, no just checking in messages from Emily. Even the family group chat went quiet, as if someone had unplugged it from the wall. At first, I thought they were regrouping, planning their next move. But by the second day, I understood something more unsettling. They weren't regrouping. They were waiting me out. This was the part of the script I knew well, even if I'd never named it before. When I didn't immediately fold, when I didn't apologize for making things difficult, the response wasn't confrontation. It was withdrawal. Emotional quarantine. If I stayed quiet long enough, the problem would resolve itself. I would come back softened. I always had. Except this time, I didn't. I went to work as usual, answered emails, sat through compliance meetings where people argued about policy language, like it mattered more than people. I smiled when required. I kept my voice steady, but something had changed in the way I observed the world. I was noticing patterns I'd previously ignored. At lunch on Thursday, a coworker asked if I was going home for Christmas. Yes, I said automatically. Then I paused. Actually, I don't know. It was the first time I'd admitted that out loud. That evening, Linda Kaplan called me back. I reviewed the preliminary details you sent, she said. Your mother died intestate. That means everything your father is doing right now is administrative posturing, not law. Then why does it feel like he's already won? I asked. Because he's counting on you not wanting to look like the bad guy, she replied. Families rely on shame more than statutes. She explained the mechanics calmly. Without a will, the estate was subject to Ohio intestacy law. My father had rights, yes, but so did Mark and I. Any transfer of the house, any reallocation of assets, required disclosure, and in some cases, consent. What happens if he already filed something, I asked. Then we request copies. Immediately, Linda said. Silence benefits whoever is already moving. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at the framed photo of my parents from 20 years earlier. A beach in North Carolina. Mom laughing, hair blown wild by the wind. Dad's arm around her shoulder. I tried to remember the last time she and I had talked about money. It came back, slowly. We were standing in the kitchen, a year before she got sick. She'd been chopping onions, complaining about Dad's habit of putting off paperwork. "If I drop dead tomorrow, everything will be a mess," she'd said. I'd laughed and told her not to be dramatic. "Promise me something," she'd said, turning to look at me. "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. Not your father, not your brother, not anyone." I hadn't thought much of it then. I thought of it now. On Friday morning, I drove past my parents' house again. This time, Mark's car was gone. The house looked quieter, almost staged. Curtains drawn, lights off. I didn't stop. I wasn't ready to be inside those walls yet. Instead, I went to the county records office. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no raised voices. Just a waiting room that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and a clerk who slid forms across the counter with bored efficiency. I requested copies of every filing associated with my mother's estate. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You're listed as a beneficiary?" "By default," I said. "Yes." She nodded and typed something into her computer. "You'd be surprised how many people don't check." I almost said, "I'm not." By the time I left, I had confirmation of what Linda had suspected. No will on file, no legal transfer of the house, no finalized distribution of assets, which meant the message my father had sent was not just premature, it was strategic. That afternoon, Mark finally called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that sounded tired, rehearsed. "Claire, this has gone too far. Dad's really upset. You're blowing this out of proportion. We just want to have a normal Christmas." Normal. The word stuck with me. Normal was me showing up, pretending nothing was wrong, smiling while decisions about my future were discussed in rooms I wasn't invited into. Normal was swallowing resentment and calling it maturity. I deleted the voicemail. That night, Linda emailed me a draft letter. Formal, precise, polite. It requested a full accounting of the estate, notified my father of my legal representation, and stated clearly that no asset transfers were to occur without my review. Reading it didn't feel triumphant. It felt like drawing a line on a map and realizing how far you'd already traveled without noticing. I hesitated before replying. There was still a part of me that wanted to believe this could be resolved quietly, that my father would see reason, that Mark would step in and say this wasn't right. But another realization settled in, heavy and unavoidable. They hadn't done this by accident. This wasn't confusion. It was a test. I replied to Linda with one word: send. The confirmation came back minutes later. That same evening, Emily texted, "I heard you got a lawyer. Is that true?" I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message. "Claire, please. You're scaring Dad." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. I was scared when I realized decisions about my life were made without me. This is me fixing that. She didn't reply. The silence returned, thicker now, but different. Less punishing, more brittle. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the day to end. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, one final thought surfaced. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to keep the family together. I was trying to keep myself intact, and I had the quiet sense that this was only the beginning. The letter landed on my father's kitchen table on a Monday morning. I know this because Emily told me, later, in a voice tight with disbelief, that he read it twice, then sat down like his legs had stopped working. I wasn't there to see it. That mattered more than I expected. For most of my life, I had been present for every difficult family moment. The mediator, the translator, the one who stayed late to clean up the emotional mess. This time, the shift happened without me in the room, and that was intentional. That morning, I was at work, reviewing a compliance audit, when Linda forwarded me a brief update. Letter delivered. Response pending. Expect pushback. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. At lunch, my phone rang. Dad again. I watched it vibrate on the table, the familiar name lighting up the screen like it always had. For a long moment, my instinct was to answer, to hear his side, to soothe, to explain. Instead, I silenced it. That was new. When I finally checked my voicemail later, his message was clipped, controlled, and carefully phrased. Claire, your attorney's letter was unnecessary. We can handle this as a family. Bringing outsiders into private matters is hurtful and extreme. I noticed what he didn't say. He didn't say the letter was wrong. He didn't deny what he'd planned. He objected to the exposure. That afternoon, Mark showed up at my door. No text, no warning, just the sound of knuckles against wood, harder than necessary. I opened the door and saw my younger brother standing there, jaw tight, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing him clearly. We need to talk, he said. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to hear what version of reality he was bringing with him. He didn't sit down. He paced. Dad's a mess, he said. He hasn't slept. You blindsided him. I found out by accident, I replied. That wasn't a blindside. That was a leak. He stopped pacing and looked at me. You're making this adversarial. No, I said calmly. I'm making it accurate. He scoffed. You always do this. You take things personally and turn them into principles. That stung. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. This isn't personal, I said. It's procedural. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. You hear yourself? Yes, I said. Do you? He ran a hand through his hair. Look, Dad's just trying to do what makes sense. You don't want the house. You said that years ago. I said I didn't want to live there, I replied. I didn't say I wanted to be erased from the decision. That's semantics. No, I said. That's consent. He exhaled hard. Emily's pregnant. We need stability. And I don't? I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough. You're fine, he said. You always land on your feet. There it was again. The myth of my resilience, used as justification for my exclusion. I didn't ask to be the sacrifice, I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. You're blowing this up, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. I didn't blow anything up, I replied. I turned on the lights. He stood there a moment longer, then shook his head. You're going to tear this family apart. I met his gaze. It was already torn. You just didn't feel it. After he left, I sat on the couch and let the silence settle. It felt different now. Less like abandonment, more like distance earned. That evening, Linda called. They responded, she said. Not directly. Their attorney did. My stomach tightened. And? They're claiming your father acted within his discretion as surviving spouse. They're also suggesting your mother expressed verbal intent that Mark inherit the house. Without documentation, I said. Correct, Linda replied, which won't hold. I closed my eyes. So what's next? We file a formal notice of interest, she said, and we request a temporary injunction preventing asset transfers until the matter is resolved. I pictured the dining room table, the papers, the quiet planning. Yes, I said. Do it. There was a pause. Claire, Linda said carefully, this will escalate things. It already has, I replied. I just wasn't informed. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. This is Aunt Helen. Your father is heartbroken. Your mother would be ashamed of how you're handling this. I stared at the words, the familiar tactic of borrowed authority. I typed back once. Please don't speak for my mother. I blocked the number. By Friday, the story circulating through the family had changed. I wasn't the excluded daughter anymore. I was the difficult one, the greedy one, the one making it about money. No one asked me what I wanted. No one asked why I felt blindsided. They talked around me, about me, without me. And somewhere in that shift, something else happened. I stopped caring about correcting them. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed to be documented. I opened my laptop and added a new section to my file. Title, Communications Log. Dates, times, messages, voicemails, not out of spite, out of clarity, because I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of decisions made for me, not with me, and I had finally stepped out of the role that made that possible. At the bottom of the document, I wrote one line, not for anyone else, but for myself. Silence is not agreement. The invitation arrived 3 days before Christmas. It wasn't a card. It wasn't even a call. It was a group text, sent at 9:18 p.m., when I was folding laundry and half watching a documentary I didn't care about. Given everything that's going on, we think it might be best if we keep Christmas low-key this year. Just immediate household. We'll catch up after the holidays. No sender name, just the family thread. Immediate household. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the familiar sting. It didn't come. What I felt instead was something quieter and more unsettling. Relief. Because now it was explicit. They hadn't just decided things without me. They had decided I was the problem that needed to be removed to preserve the image of peace. I typed nothing. I didn't need to. Within minutes, Emily sent a separate message. Claire, please don't take this the wrong way. Dad's health isn't great, and emotions are running high. This is temporary. Temporary. Like my exclusion from the will was supposed to be temporary. Like the silence was temporary. Like being minimized had ever been temporary. I placed my phone face down and finished folding the towels. The next morning, Linda called. They've requested an emergency meeting, she said. Their attorney wants to discuss a settlement. I almost laughed. That was fast, I said. It's strategic, she replied. They want this resolved before year-end. Taxes, optics, control. Do they know I've been uninvited from Christmas? I asked. There was a pause. No, but that tracks. We scheduled the meeting for December 23rd. Neutral office, neutral tone. Nothing about it felt neutral. On the drive there, I passed my parents' neighborhood. Christmas decorations everywhere. Inflatable Santas, wreaths on doors. Lights carefully arranged to suggest warmth and unity. I wondered how many of those houses hid conversations like ours, behind closed doors. The conference room was small but immaculate. My father sat at one end of the table, hands folded. Mark and Emily beside him. Their attorney, a man in his early 40s with a polished smile, sat across from Linda and me. No one hugged. No one asked how I was. We skipped straight to business. Claire, my father began. This didn't have to become so formal. I didn't respond. Linda did. My client was excluded from material decisions regarding her late mother's estate, she said. Formality was the natural consequence. The attorney smiled thinly. We're prepared to offer a compromise. He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. Go on, Linda said. The house transfers to Mark, he said smoothly. Claire receives a cash equivalent representing a portion of the home's assessed value. In exchange, she waives any future claims. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What portion? I asked. The attorney named a number. It was less than half of what the house was worth. Significantly less. That's not equitable, Linda said flatly. It reflects family needs, the attorney replied, and prior understanding. There was no prior understanding, I said. There was a decision I wasn't told about. Mark finally spoke. You're getting money. Isn't that enough? I turned to him. Enough for what? He hesitated. To move on. There it was. The goal wasn't fairness. It was compliance. I'm not here to be paid off, I said. I'm here to be acknowledged. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Claire, this is turning into something it doesn't need to be. I looked at her. It already is. Linda leaned forward. My client is entitled to an equal share under intestacy law. If this proceeds to court, the distribution will not be based on convenience. The attorney's smile faltered, just slightly. We'd like to avoid litigation, he said. So would I replied, but not at the cost of my agency. The meeting ended without resolution. As we stood to leave, my father finally looked at me. You're choosing this, he said quietly. Over family. I met his gaze. No, I'm choosing myself. You made the other choice first. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. Linda paused beside me. They're underestimating you, she said. That works in your favor. I nodded. They always have. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner for one. Pasta. A glass of wine. Nothing festive. At 7:02 p.m., my phone buzzed. A photo from Mark. The family gathered around the dining table. Dad at the head, Emily smiling. Christmas decorations glowing softly in the background. Caption: "Wish you were here." I stared at the image for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. They didn't wish I was there. They wished I was quiet. I opened my laptop and added a new line to my document. Event. Exclusion from Christmas gathering. Date. Time. Method. Then I closed the file, because somewhere between the uninvitation and the settlement offer, something in me had settled. They had mistaken my presence for permission. And now that I was gone from the table, they were about to learn what that actually meant. Christmas morning came and went without a single message from my father. No Merry Christmas, no photo of the tree, no check-in disguised as concern. The silence was intentional now, not strategic. It was punishment. I spent the morning alone, not lonely, just aware. Awareness has a weight to it once it settles in. You can't unknow what you've learned. At 10:14 a.m., Linda emailed me. They filed a transfer request yesterday afternoon. I stared at the screen. Yesterday? As in Christmas Eve? Yes, she said when I called her immediately. Your father submitted paperwork to move the house into Mark's name. It's incomplete, but it's an attempt. So they ignored the letter. They tried to run the clock, Linda replied. They assumed you'd back down over the holiday. I closed my eyes and took a breath. What do we do? We respond, she said, formally, immediately. By noon, Linda had filed an objection with the probate court, an motion to freeze all estate-related assets pending review. It wasn't dramatic. No courtroom, no raised voices, just paperwork. Filed on a day my family assumed no one was watching. That evening, as I reheated leftovers and scrolled aimlessly, a notification popped up from the county records portal. Status update. Transfer request flagged. Review pending. I set my phone down and felt something close to satisfaction for the first time since this started. Not joy, not victory. Just the quiet confirmation that their certainty had cracks in it. The next day, Mark called. I answered. Why are you doing this? He asked, without preamble. I'm protecting my rights, I replied. You're freezing everything, he said. Dad can't even refinance the house now. That's not my problem, I said. It's the consequence of acting without disclosure. He exhaled sharply. You're punishing him. No, I said. I'm stopping him. There was a pause. You always make things so official. I almost smiled. That's because unofficial is how I got cut out. He didn't respond. 2 days later, I received an email from my father's attorney. Short, curt. We acknowledge receipt of the court filing. We request a meeting to resolve this matter amicably. Amazingly, that word again, amicably, had become code for quietly. Linda forwarded it back to me with a single line. Your move. I thought about it for a long time before responding. Then I sent one sentence. All discussions will proceed through counsel. The shift was subtle, but it mattered. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was a party. On December 29th, Linda called again. There's something you should know, she said. The judge assigned to the case flagged it for expedited review. My stomach tightened. Why? Because of the timing, she replied. Holiday filings, attempted transfer without full disclosure, and conflicting beneficiary interests. It raised concerns. Concerns. Another neutral word. But I heard what was underneath it. Someone else was now paying attention. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the uninvitation. Not to confront, to observe. The driveway was empty, the house dark. Decorations still up, but no movement behind the curtains. I sat in my car and looked at the place I'd grown up. The kitchen window where my mother used to stand, watching for me when I was late. The front step where Dad had lectured me before prom. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt distance. Back home, I opened my laptop and reviewed the file Linda had sent earlier that week. Probate inventory, asset list, preliminary valuations. And then I saw it. A line item that didn't belong. A small commercial property listed under my mother's name. A rental unit in Dayton. Modest. Unremarkable. I frowned. I'd never heard of it. I cross-checked the address, pulled public records, ownership history. The property had been purchased 12 years earlier, jointly titled to my parents. Rental income deposited into an account I didn't recognize, an account that wasn't mentioned anywhere else. I called Linda. "There's a property in Dayton I didn't know about," I said. "Why wasn't this disclosed?" There was a pause. "It wasn't in the initial inventory your father provided." "Is that legal?" "It's risky," she said carefully, "especially if it's producing income." I felt something shift again, a familiar click. Pattern recognition. "Can you pull the account records?" I asked. "I can request them," Linda said. "But if he didn't disclose it voluntarily, the court may compel full financial discovery." I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about control. That evening, Emily texted me out of the blue. "Dad says this has gotten out of hand. He's worried about his reputation." I stared at the words. Not worried about fairness. Not worried about trust. Reputation. I typed back once. "Then he should have been honest from the beginning." She didn't reply. The next morning, Linda confirmed what I already suspected. "The rental property income hasn't been reported as part of the estate," she said. "If your father continued to collect rent after your mother's death without disclosure, that's a problem." "How big a problem?" I asked. "Big enough to change the tone of negotiations," she replied. I didn't feel excited. I felt grounded. For weeks, they had framed this as me being difficult, emotional, unreasonable. Now there were documents, numbers, omissions. Facts don't care how calm you appear at Christmas dinner. I closed my laptop and sat quietly, letting the weight of it settle. They had assumed I wouldn't look closely. They had assumed I'd prioritize peace over precision. They had assumed that because I didn't raise my voice, I wouldn't raise questions. They were wrong. And for the first time since that early morning text, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. That was the thought that followed me through the first week of January. Long after the Christmas lights had come down, and everyone else pretended the holidays had ended cleanly. For me, they hadn't ended at all. They had simply shifted into documentation. Linda filed a formal request for financial discovery on a Tuesday morning. Bank statements, rental income records, any account tied to my mother's name within the last 5 years. It was a standard request, neutral in tone, impossible to ignore. My father responded 2 days later, not with documents, with outrage. He left a voicemail that was nearly 3 minutes long. I listened to it once, then archived it. "Claire, this is crossing a line," he said, his voice shaking with something that sounded like anger, but carried fear underneath. "You're accusing me of things I would never do. I took care of your mother. I took care of this family. And now you're dragging my name through the mud because you didn't get your way." There it was again, the reframing. Not, "Why didn't I disclose this?" but, "How dare you look?" Linda listened to the voicemail later that afternoon. She didn't comment on his tone. She commented on what he didn't deny. "He didn't say the account doesn't exist," she said. "He said you're wrong to ask." The discovery responses arrived the following week. Not all of them. Just enough to look cooperative. Bank statements with pages missing. Rental deposits listed without corresponding lease agreements. An account labeled Household Reserve that had no clear purpose and no mention in any prior inventory. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. It was methodical. I sat at my dining table late one night, papers spread out, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was recognizing behavior I'd lived with my entire life. Selective transparency. Tell people what they need to know to stay comfortable. Omit the rest. If someone notices, accuse them of being ungrateful. I remembered being 16, asking why Mark got a car for his birthday and I got a check to help with college expenses. I'd been told it was practical, that I was mature enough to understand. I remembered being 24, covering my own moving costs after graduation, while Dad quietly paid Mark's security deposit when he moved back home. I remembered my mother, once, late at night, saying softly, "Your father doesn't like being questioned. It makes him feel judged." I'd mistaken that for something to protect. Now I saw it for what it was. Avoidance with authority. On Friday, the court issued a temporary order. All estate-related assets were frozen, pending full disclosure. I got the notice by email. No fanfare, no gavel, just a PDF attachment. Linda called 5 minutes later. "This changes leverage," she said. "How?" I asked. "Your father can't move money, refinance property, or distribute assets without court approval," she replied. "And the undisclosed rental income will be reviewed." I stared at the screen. "What happens if he used that money already?" Linda paused. "Then we talk about reimbursement." Reimbursement, another neutral word. My phone buzzed as if summoned by the thought. "Mark," I answered this time. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I followed the law," I said. "You froze everything," he snapped. "Emily's freaking out. Dad says you're trying to bankrupt him." "I didn't freeze anything," I replied. "The court did." "That's the same thing," he said. "You know what this does to us." Always us. "What about what it does to me?" I asked. There was a long silence. "You're making Dad look like a criminal," he said finally. I chose my words carefully. "If transparency makes him look bad, that's not my doing." He hung up. The next call came from Emily. She was crying. "Claire, please," she said. "This is too much. Dad's blood pressure is high. The doctor told him to avoid stress." I closed my eyes. I'd heard this one before, too. "Emily," I said gently. "Then he shouldn't have tried to transfer assets in secret." She sobbed harder. "Why are you being like this?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer would sound cruel to someone who still believed the family narrative. "I'm being consistent," I said finally. "I just stopped being convenient. That weekend, I didn't drive past the house. I didn't check social media. I didn't reread old messages looking for validation. Instead, I organized my file. I added timelines, cross-referenced dates, noted discrepancies. I wasn't building a case out of spite. I was building it because no one else ever had." Late Sunday evening, Linda emailed again. "There's something else," she wrote. "The rental property income continued to be deposited into the account after your mother's death. Sole access appears to be your father's." I leaned back in my chair and let the room go still. This wasn't just omission. This was appropriation. Monday morning, Linda called. "We need to discuss next steps," she said. "This is no longer a misunderstanding." I looked out the window at the quiet street, at people walking dogs and carrying groceries, unaware of the quiet war being waged inside my family. "What does it become?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "An accounting," she said, "and potentially a reckoning." I ended the call and sat there for a long time. I wasn't scared. I wasn't thrilled. I was steady. For years, my family had relied on one thing above all else, that I wouldn't push, that I'd accept partial truths to keep the peace, that I'd stay in my lane. They had built their certainty on my restraint, and now that restraint was gone. Not in a burst of rage, but in a series of signed documents, filed motions, and quiet refusals. The pattern was visible now, and once seen, it couldn't be undone. The court scheduled the hearing for January 18th. Not a trial, not a verdict. Just a preliminary review to assess compliance with the disclosure order. On paper, it was routine. In reality, it was the first time an outside authority would sit in a room with my family and ask questions they couldn't deflect with tone or guilt. Linda prepared me carefully. "This isn't about emotion," she said during our prep call. "It's about clarity. Answer only what's asked. Don't explain more than necessary." I smiled to myself. That's always been my strength. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. Neutral outfit. No jewelry except my watch. Hair pulled back. Not because I wanted to look impressive, but because I wanted to look unremarkable. People underestimate unremarkable women. My father arrived 10 minutes late with his attorney. Mark and Emily followed, sitting together in the back row. Emily didn't look at me. Mark did, briefly, then away. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and a voice that carried without effort. She had the calm authority of someone who'd seen every version of family drama and had no patience for theatrics. She began by summarizing the issue plainly. In a state with incomplete disclosure, contested transfers, and potential post-mortem income diversion, she said, "We're here to establish facts. Facts, not feelings." My father's attorney spoke first. He emphasized cooperation, claimed confusion, used phrases like administrative oversight and unintended delay. The judge listened without interruption. Then Linda stood. She didn't raise her voice, She didn't gesture. She simply laid out the timeline. The attempted transfer, the undisclosed rental property, the continued income stream. She ended with one sentence. My client is not seeking punishment. She is seeking visibility. The judge nodded once. Then she turned to my father. Mr. Donovan, she said, why was the rental income not disclosed as part of the estate inventory? My father cleared his throat. That property was always meant as supplemental income for household expenses. That's not my question, the judge replied calmly. Why was it not disclosed? He hesitated. It didn't seem material, he said. I watched the judge's expression change. Not anger. Something more dangerous. Interest. Materiality is not subjective, she said. Disclosure is not optional. She turned to his attorney. Were you aware of this account? The attorney shifted. I was informed there was rental income, yes. And you advised your client not to disclose it? No, he said quickly. I was told it was being accounted for. The judge made a note. That was the moment I felt the room tilt. Not toward me, toward the truth. She asked a few more questions. Precise, surgical. Each one exposing another inconsistency. When it was over, she leaned back slightly. I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of the estate, she said. All accounts, all properties, 5-year look back. Emily gasped softly. Mark stared at the floor. My father said nothing. The judge continued. Until that accounting is complete, all asset freezes remain in place. Any attempt to circumvent this order will result in sanctions. She looked directly at my father then. Transparency now will save you consequences later, she said. Choose wisely. The hearing ended. No one spoke as we filed out. In the hallway, Mark caught up to me. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. I stopped and turned to him. Yes, I said. I did. Emily approached next, eyes red. Dad's humiliated. I met her gaze. Dad hid assets. She looked away. My father walked past me without a word. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the house dark except for a single lamp. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but it was a clean kind of tired, the kind that comes from standing upright after years of bending. Linda called once more before bed. She did exactly what I hoped, she said. They can't manage this internally anymore. What happens next? I asked. Now, Linda replied. The story stops being theirs. I hung up and sat in the quiet. For years, my family had controlled the narrative by deciding who spoke and when, by keeping things informal, by relying on my reluctance to disrupt. Now the narrative was written in filings and transcripts. And for the first time, no one could rewrite it behind my back. The forensic accountant's report arrived 3 weeks later. It came as a secure PDF, 47 pages long, sent on a Wednesday afternoon when I was between meetings. I didn't open it right away. I already knew, in my bones, that whatever was inside would change things permanently. Numbers have a way of doing that. They don't raise their voice, they don't accuse, they simply sit there, undeniable. I waited until I got home. I made tea. I sat at the table. I opened the file. The summary was clinical. Rental income deposited into an undisclosed account for 14 months following my mother's death. Withdrawals labeled household expenses that exceeded any reasonable cost of maintenance. Transfers to Mark's account. Not gifts, not loans. Regular amounts, consistent timing. The house transfer attempt wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a system. I read slowly, carefully, like I did at work when something mattered. Dates, amounts, cross-references, footnotes. By page 12, my hands had gone cold. By page 20, I stopped being shocked. By page 30, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because what I had sensed for years was now visible in black and white. Not favoritism, not misunderstanding. A pattern of financial prioritization. My father hadn't just planned to give Mark the house. He'd already been doing it in pieces. I called Linda. She'll see this, she said before I could speak. Judges don't argue with spreadsheets. What does this mean? I asked. It means your leverage just became reality, she replied. They can't explain this away as grief. That evening, my phone rang. Dad. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, shorter this time. Controlled, but thinner. Claire, he said, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I deleted it. The next call was from Mark. I answered, because I wanted to hear it from him. Did you know? I asked before he could speak. There was a pause. Know what? The transfers, I said. The money, he exhaled. Dad said it was temporary, that it would all balance out. Did you ask how? I asked. Silence. You always assume the worst, he said finally. I almost laughed. I assumed the numbers, I replied. He hung up. 2 days later, Linda forwarded me an email from opposing counsel. They wanted to reopen settlement discussions. The tone had changed. No more amicable. No more urgency about Christmas or family unity. Now the language was cautious, legal. They proposed a revised distribution. Equal shares, full accounting, reimbursement of misallocated funds. No apology. I stared at the offer for a long time. It was what I'd been entitled to from the beginning. And yet, it felt incomplete. Not because I wanted more, because something else had been lost. I met Linda the following afternoon. You don't have to accept this, she said. We can push further. I know, I replied, but that's not what this is about anymore. She studied me. Then what is it about? I thought of the messages, the uninvitation, the way my father had looked past me in the hallway. It's about acknowledgement, I said, not money. She nodded slowly. Then we can make that part of the resolution. We drafted a response. Acceptance of equal distribution, contingent upon full disclosure, reimbursement, and a written acknowledgement entered into the record that all beneficiaries were entitled to transparency and consent. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. When the reply went out, I felt something loosen in my chest. That night, Emily texted, Dad's devastated. He says he never meant to hurt you. I stared at the words. Intent had become the last refuge. I believe he didn't mean to, I typed back. But he did. She didn't respond. The following week, we returned to court. This time, my father spoke. Not defensively, not strategically. I should have handled this differently, he said, voice flat. I thought I was doing what was best. The judge looked at him for a long moment. What's best requires consent, she said, not assumption. She approved the revised distribution, ordered reimbursement, closed the accounting phase. Just like that, it was done. Outside the courtroom, my father approached me. He looked older than he had weeks earlier, smaller. I hope you're satisfied, he said. I searched his face, looking for something that might never come. I'm clear, I replied. He nodded once, then turned away. That evening, I went home and closed the file on my laptop. Not because it no longer mattered, but because it no longer owned me. The numbers had said their piece. And for the first time in my life, so had I. The house felt different once the court date passed. Not quieter, not calmer, just neutral. Like a place that had finally stopped waiting for something to explode. I noticed it first in the mornings. I stopped waking up with that tight pressure behind my ribs. The one that made me check my phone before my feet touched the floor. There were no new emails from lawyers, no missed calls, no deadlines hanging over my head like weather. The fight was over. And for a while, I didn't know what to do with that. People talk about closure, like it's a door that shuts cleanly. It isn't. It's more like a room you've lived in for years, suddenly goes quiet, and you realize you never learned how to rest inside it. Work tried to pull me back into its normal rhythm. Meetings, proposals, performance reviews. On paper, I was doing well. I always had. But there was a hollowness in the spaces where adrenaline used to live. One afternoon, my boss asked if I wanted to take a few days off. Not a suggestion, an observation. You've been carrying something, she said. You don't have to prove anything here. I almost said no, out of habit. Then I said yes. I drove to the coast alone. No itinerary. No expectations. I rented a small place with a porch that faced the water and a kitchen that smelled faintly of salt and old wood. The first night, I slept 12 hours straight. No dreams, no replaying conversations, just dark. On the second day, I went for a walk along the shoreline. The wind was sharp, the kind that clears your head, whether you want it to or not. I thought about my mother. Not the way she had been at the end, but the earlier version. The one who hummed while folding laundry. The one who used to squeeze my hand twice when she was proud, but didn't want to make a scene. I wondered if she knew. Not about the money. about the imbalance. Somewhere along the way, I realized I had stopped trying to answer that question. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was no longer waiting for permission. When I got back, there was a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, from my father. I stood there longer than necessary, turning it over in my hands like it might burn me. Inside, the writing was careful, slower than his used to be. He wrote about regret, about not seeing things clearly, about believing he was protecting the family from conflict when all he'd done was postpone it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for time. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, not as a rejection, as a boundary. Emily called a few days later. Her voice was different, less defensive. I didn't understand, she admitted. I thought you were just being stubborn. I know, I said. I should have asked more questions. Yes, I agreed. You should have. There was a pause. Can we start over? She asked. I looked around my apartment, the quiet shelves, the unclaimed space. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But we can start slower. She accepted that. Mark didn't call. That was its own answer. Weeks passed. Then months. The house was sold. The proceeds were divided according to the revised agreement. The money landed in my account without ceremony, like a delayed paycheck from a job I'd already quit. I didn't spend it right away. I let it sit, not because I was afraid, because I no longer needed to rush. At a family gathering that summer, I wasn't invited. I heard about it afterward, casually, through a mutual friend, and for the first time, it didn't sting. I realized something then. Being excluded only hurts when you still want entry. I had stopped wanting it. One evening, Linda invited me out for dinner. We talked about everything except the case. Her kids, her plans, the weather. As we were leaving, she said something that stayed with me. You handled that cleanly, she said. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth. I thought about it, I admitted. She smiled. You chose yourself instead. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook. No to-do lists. No strategy, just space. I wrote one sentence. I don't owe anyone access to me. I closed the notebook. For years, I had confused endurance with love, silence with maturity, compliance with peace. The case hadn't given me justice in the dramatic sense. It had given me clarity, and clarity was enough. The phone buzzed once more that week. A message from my father. I'm proud of you, it read. Even if I don't always know how to say it. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, out of honesty. Some things arrived too late to require an answer. I went to bed that night without checking my phone. Outside, the city hummed. Ordinary, unbothered, and inside me, something settled. Not anger, not victory, just the quiet knowledge that the ground beneath my feet was finally my own. I thought the story was over. That was my mistake. Life rarely unravels in a clean line. It loosens one thread at a time, and you don't always realize which one matters until you feel the fabric shift in your hands. It started with a letter from a bank I didn't use anymore. The envelope was thin, impersonal, the kind of mail most people throw away without opening. I almost did. It sat on my counter for 2 days, tucked beneath grocery flyers and a receipt I meant to file. When I finally opened it, I had to read it twice. Notice of attempted account access. The account number was familiar, old, one I hadn't touched in years. A secondary trust account my mother had opened when I was in college, back when she still believed paperwork could substitute for conversation. The letter wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse. It simply stated that an unauthorized party had attempted to initiate a beneficiary change, and that the request had been denied pending verification. Unauthorized party. I sat down. I logged into the account portal, my fingers moving slower than usual. The balance was modest compared to the estate. Not life-changing. But that wasn't the point. The access request had been made 2 days earlier from an IP address registered to my father's city. I didn't call him. I called Linda. She listened without interrupting. This wasn't accidental, she said when I finished. And it wasn't about money. What was it about then? I asked. Control, she replied. Or the illusion of it. She explained that the trust had likely been overlooked during the initial accounting because it predated my mother's final will. Technically separate, legally protected, but emotionally unfinished. Someone had gone looking. I knew who. Still, I asked. Is this actionable? I said. Yes, Linda said. If you want it to be. I stared at the screen, at the transaction log, frozen mid-attempt, like a hand caught reaching into a drawer it didn't belong in. I thought about the letter my father had written. The careful phrasing. The request for time. Time to do what? That evening, Emily showed up at my door unannounced. She looked nervous, not defensive, not rehearsed, just tired. I didn't know how to tell you, she said as soon as I opened the door. Tell me what? I asked. She swallowed. Dad's been spiraling. I let her in. We sat at the table where I'd once opened the forensic report. The same place where the numbers had told the truth before anyone else would. He keeps saying he made mistakes, she continued. But then he talks about fixing things, making them right, making sure everything ends up where it should. Where he thinks it should, I said. She nodded. I found paperwork, she admitted. Drafts, notes. He was trying to consolidate things, accounts that weren't in the will. My chest tightened. The trust, I said. Her eyes flicked up to mine. Yes, I exhaled slowly. He didn't get anywhere, she rushed to add. I stopped him. I told him he couldn't do that. But he tried, I said. Yes. The silence between us was thick, but not hostile, just heavy with recognition. He's afraid, Emily said quietly. Not of losing money, of losing relevance. I believed her. I also believed that fear didn't excuse action. I'm not going to confront him, I said after a moment. I'm going to document it. Emily looked relieved and disappointed at the same time. That's probably smarter, she said. I nodded. It's cleaner. After she left, I sat alone and pulled up the trust documents, read them, line by line. Not as a daughter this time, but as a steward of my own life. There was nothing dramatic hidden there. No surprise inheritance, no secret fortune, just intention. My mother had named me sole beneficiary, explicitly, in her handwriting, with a note in the margin. For Claire, so she never has to ask. I closed the file. The next morning, Linda filed a formal notice with the court. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. A record. Unauthorized access attempt. Documented. Preserved. It was a line drawn quietly in the sand. 2 days later, my father called. I answered. I know about the trust, he said without preamble. I know, I replied. I wasn't trying to take anything from you, he insisted. I just wanted to understand it, to make sure it was handled properly. You tried to change the beneficiary, I said calmly. He paused. I thought it might simplify things, he said finally. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I've documented the attempt, I said. I won't pursue it further unless it happens again. There it was. The boundary, he exhaled. You don't trust me. I trust patterns, I said, and I protect myself accordingly. The line went quiet. I raised you better than this, he said. I almost smiled. You raised me to survive, I replied. This is what that looks like. We hung up without resolution, without apology, without drama, and for the first time, I understood something clearly. The inheritance wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It was the belief that I would always make myself smaller to keep the peace. That was the last thing he still thought he owned. That night, I moved the trust into a new structure, new oversight, new safeguards. Not because I expected another attempt, because I no longer left doors unlocked for people who mistook access for entitlement. As I signed the final document, my hand didn't shake. I felt steady, finished, or so I thought. 3 days later, Linda called again. Her voice was measured, professional. Claire, she said, something just came across my desk. What kind of something? I asked. There's a petition, she said, filed this morning. My stomach dropped. By whom? She hesitated just long enough for the answer to land before the words did. Your father, she said. He's requesting a formal review of capacity. Yours. The room went very still, and in that silence, I realized the quiet after the storm hadn't been peace. It had been the pause before the last move. The petition was thin, 8 pages. No affidavits from doctors, no dramatic allegations, just carefully worded concern. Phrases like diminished judgment, erratic financial decisions, undue stress following bereavement. It wasn't loud. That's what made it dangerous. My father wasn't trying to win loudly anymore. He was trying to win quietly, through procedure, through doubt. Linda came over that evening. She didn't bring panic with her. She brought a legal pad and a calm that had weight. "This is weak," she said after reading it twice. "Emotionally aggressive. Legally thin." "But it's still filed," I said. "Yes," she replied, "which means we respond. Cleanly." I nodded. I wasn't afraid. I was tired. There's a difference. "What does responding look like?" I asked. "Documentation," she said, "not defense. Proof of capacity, employment records, financial independence, decision history. We don't argue, we demonstrate." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was spiraling, but because I was inventorying every choice I'd made over the last decade, every apartment I'd paid for myself, every promotion, every tax return, every signature that had never needed permission. I realized something around 3 a.m. He wasn't questioning my capacity. He was resenting my independence. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I wore a navy suit I'd bought myself years earlier for a conference my father hadn't attended because it wasn't worth the travel. I sat straight. I made eye contact. I didn't perform stability. I embodied it. My father sat across the room. He didn't look at me. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just diminished by his own persistence. The judge reviewed the materials. Linda presented my records, my employment history, letters from my employer, bank statements showing consistent management, medical clearance from my primary care physician, unprompted, thorough. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, not to defend myself, to state facts. "My name is Claire Whitman," I said. "I am 32 years old. I am fully employed. I manage my finances independently. I have no history of cognitive impairment. I have never delegated my decision-making authority to anyone." I paused. This petition is not about concern. It's about discomfort with boundaries. The judge looked up. "Ms. Whitman," she said, "are you alleging malice?" "No," I replied. "I'm alleging control." Silence followed. Then the judge spoke. "This court does not remove autonomy without evidence," she said. "There is none here." She dismissed the petition. Just like that. No lecture, no spectacle. It was over. Outside the courtroom, my father approached me. He didn't look angry. He looked lost. "I was trying to help," he said. "I know," I replied. He waited. Maybe for forgiveness. Maybe for reassurance. I offered neither. "I won't be available for conversations like this anymore," I said. "If you contact me again regarding my capacity, my finances, or my choices, it will go through counsel." His mouth opened, then closed. "I hope you find peace," he said finally. "I already have," I replied. I walked away without looking back. That evening, I went home and did something simple. I changed my emergency contact. I updated my will, named beneficiaries who didn't question my existence, added clauses that made interference legally expensive. Then I sat at my table and wrote one last sentence in the notebook I'd started months earlier. "Boundaries are not punishments. They are acknowledgments." I didn't cut my family off in a dramatic way. I didn't announce anything. I simply stopped responding to messages that crossed lines. I stopped explaining decisions that weren't up for debate. Emily and I still talk. Carefully, honestly. Mark remains silent, and that's okay. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Love that requires you to surrender your agency isn't love. It's management. Inheritance isn't just what you receive when someone dies. It's what you're expected to give up while they're alive. I chose not to. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, let me say this plainly. You don't need to prove your sanity to people who benefit from your silence. You don't need permission to protect yourself, and you don't owe access to anyone who mistakes control for care. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this don't live in isolation. They live in recognition. And if you want to hear more true-to-life stories about family, boundaries, and the quiet kind of justice, consider subscribing. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's choosing yourself.